We good?
Yeah,
I feel like you're a little stressed out.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. All right, welcome back to another episode. You may recognize this man over here, assistant physical therapist over at Summit Rehab here in Lee Summit, Mr. John Harris. And he really wanted to talk about this topic. This is like his main topic, I think. It's what it keeps him up at night, is what makes healthy feet, all right? So we're going to talk about really three different topics today. Number one, why feet are important. It sounds silly, but feet are kind of maybe overlooked, I would think, when it comes to the body.
They can be, yeah.
Number two, foot mechanics. Believe it or not, your foot is a joint, correct?
Mm-hmm.
That's impressive. I did not know that. Number three, proper footwear, shoes. John's going to maybe make some suggestions there, and hopefully we can fix your feet and fix a whole bunch of other injuries and make you move as healthy as possible, right? So first off, John, let's talk about why are these darn feet so important?
So last time we talked a lot about what causes injury, right? And I think we came up with when we exceed capacity, we get hurt, right? And then some of the ways we can manage our capacity with our training loads is through volume and then through mechanics, right? Ideally, what we want to do is we want to put ourselves in mechanics that allow us higher thresholds of training capacity. Where that gets looked over often with the foot, okay, is we're told that we need this footwear or this insert or that insert, and most people don't understand the structures of the foot. The foot is your first point of contact with the ground and has a huge relationship with how you create good positions all the way up the chain.
Makes sense to me.
So, the foot, okay? Basic anatomy of the foot is we have the tibia and the fibular head, okay? The shin bones, if you will. You have the heel, the calcaneus. You have these little bones in here, which comprise your arch, okay? You have your metatarsals, which are the finger part of your toes, and then you have your toes, okay? Right. You have three arches in your foot, and this is important. We'll come back to this.
I have read about that.
Okay? Yeah. We have the medial arch, okay? That's the arch everybody knows about. We have the lateral arch, and then we have the transverse arch, okay? If you know anything about physics, okay, your foot is a triangle of arches, both pretty incredible structures in the physics world, okay? And it's designed to absorb and adapt to lots of stress, okay? Now, oftentimes, one of the things we see most over at the clinic is overpronation of the foot, okay? Back with what we talked about last time, anytime we load a joint, we have to create stability at that joint. And we talked about how we can create stability actively or how we can create stability passively.
Do you think that's what most people do, is overpronate there?
I think that's probably a little bit more common, and some people tend to oversupinate as well.
But show real quick what you mean by kind of like overpronation.
So when we pronate, this is a right foot, okay? If this is what we would call a neutral arch, okay? What tends to happen is when we load the foot, you're designed to pronate a little bit to absorb some of that stress, but most people tend to pronate to their end range.
It's kind of like a collapsed ankle almost.
A collapsed ankle. On the flip side, okay, if you think of it like a pendulum, we have one end range of motion here. The other thing people tend to do, and this is when they roll their ankles, is they'll oversupinate like that. And when we do that, we tend to hurt our ankle, okay? When we oversupinate, that tends to be much more of an acute problem. Overpronation tends to be much more of a chronic problem, okay? And so what happens is when we overpronate, not only does our medial arch collapse, but our transverse arch collapses as well, okay? We tend to lose ankle mobility, and this tends to become the strategy that the brain takes in order to manage load, okay? And so what happens is, can we see my feet from here?
Yeah.
Okay, if I pop my shoe off, all right, if I create what's called a short foot, or I lift not only the medial arch of my foot, I also lift the transverse arch of my foot, so you can kind of see.
Just scoot back a little bit here. Let me make sure,
Yeah, you can see on my foot here, I go from a flattened medial arch and transverse arch to a lifted medial arch and transverse arch. You can see how it affects what my knee does. If I hold that short foot and I load my knee goes out, right? If I overpronate and I load my foot, or I load my knee kind of collapses into this valgus position,
right?
Okay, and so
that's not where we want to be.
That's typical. You do not have as much threshold or capacity to manage load in that position.
Gotcha.
Right, typically. And so what happens is when we start to pronate chronically, it can create problems all the way up the chain. You with me? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. And so
believe me, I feel it when it's not working correctly.
Right. And so then what happens is oftentimes we come in and everybody tells me, well, I have flat feet. My grandma has flat feet. My mom had flat feet. Right. It's a genetic or hereditary problem.
We were just talking about that.
And there's different kinds of flat feet. Okay. There are structurally flat feet, which means the foot is built without an arch. This is not very common.
I wouldn't think so.
Most people have what are called functionally flat feet. What that means is they're built with an arch, okay, but their brain can't control it very well. And so then what happens is they fall to that end range, okay? A quick little test you can do at home is to stand on your tiptoes. If you can stand up on your tiptoes, you have a functioning arch. Your brain might not use it or talk to it very well when you're loading, but you have an arch,
right.
Okay? If you are built without an arch, you cannot stand on your tiptoes and it'll look more like this.
That looks crappy.
So when we want to start utilizing the arch, oftentimes one of the reasons we tend to pronate is because we lose foot intrinsic control. When we lose foot intrinsic control, okay, or basically our ability for our toes to function independently, we should be able to move that big toe independently of the four toes, both into flexion or pushing. You can try this at home. Push your big toe down and lift your other four toes, and then push your four little toes down and lift your big toe. Okay,
that's harder than it looks.
It's a lot of people can't do it at all, and you should be able to abduct and adduct your toes or spread your toes and pull them back together. Again, most people can't do that very well.
So your toes should just act just like your fingers do.
To a lesser degree, but yes, right? Just like we have autonomous finger control, we should be able to control our toes or have good foot intrinsic control. Right. As we lose that, and there's a lot of theories on why we lose that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. What tends to happen is the brain does not have the input it needs to create stability, and we tend to pronate.
Gotcha.
You with me? Does that make sense? So one of the best ways you can start working on that is working on what is called a short foot. The best way to do this, okay, is to keep your big toe on the ground and act, and some people need different cues, but act like you have a string attached to your arch and you're pulling your arch up. Okay.
Gotcha.
Some people will feel like they're twisting their shin out. Historically, in the lifting community, coaches have told athletes when they're squatting to screw their feet into the floor or spread the floor. All of those cues are used to help people create that short foot. Okay. And what that does is it raises that medial and that transverse arch to put your foot in a position that it can absorb and adapt to stress a little bit better. What you'll notice, especially if you tend to pronate chronically, when you go raise into that short foot, is your toes will probably curl quite a bit, right? If you look at my foot, right, and I've got black socks on, so it might be hard to see, but when I pronate and then go into that short foot, my toes don't curl, right? But oftentimes if somebody is pronated chronically, their toes will curl. And the reason that happens is when your medial arch collapses, so does your transverse arch. Okay, hopefully you can see this on the video here. So now when you go lift that medial arch, that transverse arch is still pretty stiff, okay? And so those toes have to curl in order to maintain contact. As you spend more time here, that mobility through that transverse arch will improve, and you'll create that short foot a little bit better.
So there are a couple exercises, though, that you were talking about doing for the foot there. Some things that we can possibly do to help create that arch or stabilize the arch?
Yeah. So the best way to do it, so for most people, all right, it's just a neuromuscular control thing. It's a skill. How do we get better at skills? We
work
practice, right? And so
it's about practice?
We start by practicing just standing, seated, whatever, working on pulling that arch up or working on that short foot. And then ultimately what we want to do is as we become more skilled at doing that, we want that to carry over into dynamic activities like walking. So if you watch my sock line when I walk here in the video, I take a step and I push through my big toe, but you see my ankle or my sock line doesn't really change a whole lot. That's an actively stable gait, and you can see how my arch and my foot affect my knee versus I take a step and I pronate as I load through and then push off my big toe like that. Right?
I think I fall into that category.
A lot of people do. And so a lot of people then ask me, well, why does this happen? Why do we lose that foot intrinsic control? And I will tell you, the research, there's not a lot of clear research on this yet, but my opinion is, and I think this is becoming more and more of a popular opinion, is due to the footwear that we wear. Right. Okay. If you look at kids' feet, if you look at the feet of people that have grown up unshod or not really wearing shoes, typically third world feet, what you'll notice is the toes are actually the widest portion of the foot.
Yeah, see, that's insane.
Right.
I wouldn't think about that.
If you look at most modern shoes, especially fashionable shoes, if you look at the most feet of adults in first world countries, what we tend to notice is the met heads, or the ball of the foot, is the widest portion of the foot, and the toes kind of push and squeeze together, right? And that's just how footwear is built, but that's not how your foot is built. And so what happens is, after years and years of pushing these toes together, your brain loses its ability to communicate with those toes, right? And so a big offender is cleats, okay? And so if you look at these cleats, obviously they're super narrow here, but if you look at the widest portion of the cleat is right here. You can see that there,
not where
right?
it's supposed to be.
Not where it's supposed to be. It's at the ball of the foot.
Right.
And so if you spend years in shoes like these, or even just regular tennis shoes or dress shoes, right, your foot intrinsic control is going to be limited.
Right.
And so our next topic is proper footwear. Typically, what I tell people to look for in a pair of shoes is, first, you want to see a wide toe box. All right. This is a brand called Altras. They are my favorite brand of shoes because they meet the two criteria that I'm going to give you. They have a wide toe box, not necessarily a wide shoe, but they have a foot-shaped platform.
So do most, you can buy a wider shoe nowadays. When you're going to buy that shoe, is the company or the shoe company talking about wider here? Or are they mainly talking about wider here, or is it a combination?
Typically, they're talking about the whole width of the shoe all the way down. The actual platform of the shoe doesn't really tend to change. And so even with a wide traditional shoe, you'll still have that tapered toe box. What we like to see is a wide toe box. And you notice this shoe...
Is that the actual physical name that they would use when people are going out and looking for shoes?
You would want to look for a wide toe box shoe.
So you can go to the shoe salesman and say, I want a wide toe box, and they'll know what that means.
Hopefully. If they're good shoe salesmen.
Okay.
Another thing that you can ask for too is a foot-shaped or a naturally shaped shoe.
Naturally shaped shoe.
They're becoming a lot more common. Altra makes a bunch of them, ALTRA. There's a company called Vivo Barefoot that makes a bunch. Lems, I think, is another company that
you
makes
can find
them.
those probably
you can find them on Amazon or online. But what this does is it allows your toes to spread. And as our toes can spread, those foot intrinsic muscles start to work a little bit better, and you can create a better level of stability at the foot. Okay. The other thing we want to look at when we look at a shoe is the heel drop. Okay. Most shoes tend to be a little bit chunkier in the back than they are in the front, right? And what that does, even though it's subtle, is it puts you at a forward angle, or it accommodates most people's lack of ankle mobility, which is great if we're using that for a specific instance, like when we use wear lifters, right? However, if we take 10,000 steps a day in a small elevated heel, well, I think at this point everybody agrees that ladies' heels, big heels, are not healthy, right? These are just as not healthy, but maybe at a lower level, a much more chronic level. And so what we look for too is zero heel drop. So that means that the
zero heel drop.
Yep. So the heel and
if you ask a shoe salesman about that, will they know what that is?
They should.
They should.
They should, or at least a minimal heel drop.
So you should probably go to maybe a store that just sells shoes, right?
Yeah.
It seems like that would be the best place to go.
Correct. And so, and again, that's why I really like companies like Altra or Vivo Barefoot, because every shoe that they make fits that category. They're zero heel drop, they're wide toe box. And what it does is it allows your foot to start having to create stability the way it's supposed to, which will then have a positive effect all the way up the chain.
So what sort of shoes should people avoid? Maybe some type of brands, or talk about sandals and stuff like that. Why are sandals, so bad for the foot?
Flip-flops in general.
Flip-flops in general, yes.
Kelly Starrett says athletes don't wear flip-flops. Some people may agree or disagree with that. But what happens with a flip-flop in general is that big toe has to adduct in order to make sure, or squeeze on the thong of the flip-flop in order to make sure that the flip-flop stays on. As that big toe adducts, it cannot propel you very well. And what'll tend to happen, again, hopefully you can see my foot, what'll tend to happen is instead of pushing through like this, you will squeeze together and push through like that.
So
right?
like that weird position that you were showing earlier when people couldn't create that arch.
Right, exactly. And then that in and of itself probably isn't necessarily a bad thing, but you multiply that times 10,000 steps a day.
We're talking millions of steps a year.
Yeah. There's a huge cumulative effect.
So the feet actually probably do the most amount of reps in the body over an entire lifetime.
Oh, sure. Well, orthopedically, at least. Yeah, absolutely. And so obviously we can get a lot more into depth, but on that. But zero heel drop, wide toe box. Work on creating that short foot,
right?
And you'll be started on making your feet absorb and adapt to stress a little bit better. If you are interested in learning more about what a healthy foot looks like, there's some great Instagram accounts called @TheFootCollective. They do a really good job. And then there is @TheBarefoot Podiatrist, who is a podiatrist who subscribes to a natural foot.
Yeah, we'll put that information here in the item description so everybody can find it also. Good deal, John.
Awesome.
Hey, thanks again, buddy. Appreciate it, man.
Not a problem.